Okay, so today, again, we're finishing off the modern day presidents. The last video I did, we got up to Mikhail Gorbachev and the bell rang. So Mikhail Gorbachev, again, was the leader of the Soviet Union at the very end. Okay, when the Soviet Union starts to fall, he kind of guides them ever so gently to the final stages of the Cold War. All right, and basically what happened is that the Soviet policies of communism really just couldn't continue. They were just too compounded upon themselves. The problems were too big trying to support the actual regime that after a while became pretty obvious that the Soviet Union was collapsing. Some of the republics were starting to break away. Some of the early ones were, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The Ukraine started to break away, and before you knew it, there were 15 separate nations breaking away from Russia. And so Gorbachev kind of guides them to the finish line here, and it pretty much becomes obvious that the Cold War is coming to a close. In the 1984 election, Reagan rides to re-election on a wave of popularity that was very similar to Nixon, which became a problem because Nixon, of course, rode to a wave of popularity to re-election in the 70s, and people remembered at that point what happened afterwards. So there was always this kind of fear that Reagan, it was just too good to be true, like there's got to be something wrong. And the Iran-Contra affair was kind of the one that, was the one that was supposed to kind of nail him to the wall, if you will. But it seemed like Reagan really wasn't involved in any of it. It was just people within his administration. And so historians have called Reagan's presidency the Teflon presidency. Teflon's a substance that you put on pans so that things don't stick, okay? It was always kind of like these terrible things would happen during Reagan's presidency, but it never seemed to stick to him. It was always somebody within the administration that kind of took the fall. As historians start to look into Reagan, they're starting to realize that he was kind of a hands-off administrator, which means that there could be corruption underneath him that he's just not aware of. But we've also brought up questions about whether or not he was really 100% with it at that point, because he had early stages of Alzheimer's, and Reagan has since passed away from Alzheimer's. So the 84 election was him trouncing a Democrat by the name Walter Mondale, who just passed away the other day at the age of 93. Mondale gets absolutely hammered in that election. And again, Reagan rides to a wave of popularity like we haven't really seen in recent elections, because you noticed most of our elections, especially in your lifetime, have been razor thin. And it's kind of been that way all the way back to Bill Clinton, really. I mean, a lot of the elections have been very, very close. Needless to say, during his second half, he does a number of things, but the one that kind of people made fun of him for was he tried to kind of create this dome of protective weapons and strategic defense systems that they eventually labeled Star Wars, as kind of an allusion to protecting a planet, like they would in the science fiction movie Star Wars. And the Strategic Defense Initiative was this idea that if Russia shot off a nuclear weapon, that we would shoot it down using lasers. Okay? Even NASA scientists were like, I don't think that's really possible, but we tried and we spent a lot of money doing it. The only thing that will take down a missile at this point is another missile. Okay? So we've kind of at least done that, but the problem is that if the nuclear bomb is armed and you shoot it down with a missile, what are you really doing in a sense? Blowing up a nuclear weapon in space or in the atmosphere, which, depending upon where you hit it, might actually be worse than it hitting wherever it was supposed to hit. Okay? The idea of putting that much radiation into the atmosphere and scattering it over the eastern seaboard instead of letting it just hit someplace, scientists disagree widely of what would happen.
Will we lose gravitational pull?
No. Has nothing to do with that. Okay. However, you're going to talk about a lot of people dying because of radiation poisoning, a ton of people dying because of cancer. And not to mention the fact that nuclear weapons tend to knock up a lot of dust into the atmosphere. And I don't know if you've ever heard the term nuclear winter. What they're really talking about there is the atmosphere being polluted by dust, debris, whatever else being tossed into the atmosphere and not allowing the sunlight to get through and plunging us down into very cold temperatures, okay, which would affect crops, it would affect the ability for us to farm, it would affect, by extension, our ability to feed each other. And let's be honest, if we messed up the global climate that much, rain would certainly become a problem at that point, because if you're knocking that much dust and grime into the water sources, you're really having to filter it, and that's kind of a chore, to say the least. So needless to say, it would be really nice if human beings would figure out how to get along as opposed to trying to kill each other, because, you know, Russia wanting to kill us, they called it during Reagan's presidency, and even before that, mutually assured destruction. Okay, they called it MAD. Mutually assured destruction was the idea that if you shoot off nuclear weapons and we shoot off nuclear weapons, then all we're doing is ruining humanity. Okay, so luckily we haven't tried it, okay, even though we've come close. But needless to say, Reagan, still very popular when he decides to move on in 1988 and give way to his vice president, George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush is a career politician. He's somebody that's been in the House. He's somebody that's been in, he was the leader of the CIA for a while. He's been in cabinets. He's kind of been this jack of all trades government employee. And he also was involved in the oil business down in Texas. And this was after he survived a World War II, being shot down as a fighter pilot in World War II and being rescued in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So he's had quite the life up until this point. He was the vice president under Reagan. He gets elevated. And he basically is president when the Soviet Union officially kind of falls apart. Okay, so when the Cold War is almost officially brought to a close, it's during the time of George H.W. Bush. So you see Gorbachev kind of give way. A guy named Boris Yeltsin steps in, who's kind of a goofy looking character in his own right. So if you have your computer up and you want to see
What's his name?
a very typical Russian, okay, a very stereotypical Russian, I should say, Boris Yeltsin. You'll probably find a lot of pictures of him smiling way too big with Bill Clinton, and definitely a few of him having really red-faced cheeks because he's probably drunk.
Wait, Boris Nelson?
He looks
Looks like
gross.
he's having a good time.
Wait.
Positive.
Did I
Yeltsin.
see a person?
Looks
No,
like
that's the president of the UK one. I can't
What
remember.
is it? Let me see. Did you look it up?
Yeah, not Boris Johnson, Boris Yeltsin.
Why is he always throwing him a piece?
Yeah, he'll get cute with his piece on. Not really. Like, this is
Well, you know.
Yes, I know you
Oh
more.
my god, stop. Look at it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Give me 90 Day Fiance vibes.
so, by the way, just as a side note, you always want current events. If any of you are single looking to mingle, both Bill and Melinda Gates are back on the market.
Let's go.
Who?
The most expensive divorce of all time. Bill and Melinda Gates announced yesterday that they are separating. Bill's 65, Melinda's 56.
It's kind of cute though.
They're both going to have billions and billions of dollars to spend, and they're going to be back on the market. So,
I saw Bill Gates Tinder.
All
Sign
the
me up.
gold diggers better get ready.
so
Oh.
hey, back off. I think the Kardashians have first crack at it.
Why would they? That's not even fair. They need to think of the fourth.
Well, how else are they going to make money?
The
Can't,
best.
can't possibly be their talent.
What do you mean?
Northie has a lot of talent. Did you hear her sing?
What
are
Anyway,
They are close.
aside from Carol's delusion here, let's talk a little bit about George H.W. Bush. Again, George H.W. Bush comes in, the fall of the Soviet Union occurs, but he still has problems because they're not the only communist nation. And as the Soviet Union is kind of guiding towards this weird finality, China also has problems. And it's young people in China, people that are basically your age, decide that they don't want to live in a communist dictatorship anymore. So they start protesting within Tiananmen Square in Beijing, okay, which is kind of like the main square for the government. They kind of crowd in and they start demanding for democratic reforms. And this is, of course, being broadcast live on television across the globe. I remember this very distinctly. I was about 9 years old when this happened. And I remember watching the news coverage and my mother reaching down and covering my eyes because she wasn't sure if I was going to watch somebody get killed. Because
What?
the Chinese government decided that they didn't want these people protesting anymore, so they sent in tanks, okay, into a very crowded square full of people. And these tanks are rolling down the road, and one guy, called Tank Man, now, because we don't know his name, steps out in front. He's got a little bag of something, either his overnight bag or God knows what he was carrying, but he steps out in front of about 4 or 5 tanks. Tanks are coming at about 40, 45 miles an hour, and he stands in front of them, and they grind to a halt. And they grind to a halt about 10 feet away from him. It's one of the most famous photographs from that event. If you look up Tiananmen Square Tank Man, that's the image. It became a very iconic image. It was one man standing against a regime, refusing to back down, willing to sacrifice his life. And then, of course, when the tanks stop, he climbs up on one of the tanks, starts banging on the hatch, basically screaming at the people to come out, you come out and talk to me, all right? It was kind of this image of hope in China. It didn't last. The government started to crack down even more, and people did die. We don't know how many died in Tiananmen Square. We don't know how many were arrested. We don't know how many of those that were arrested were eventually killed, tortured, maimed, whatever else, in prison, because the Chinese government basically just said, what protest? What are you talking about? They showed up, they said some things, and then they went home. That's kind of how the Chinese operate. The Communist Party is basically going to tell you what they want you to hear. They have their little propaganda ministry, so we've never really gotten a straight answer about what really occurred within Tiananmen Square. But it made it very clear that China was not going to fall the way the Soviet Union did. Whereas Mikhail Gorbachev kind of eased them towards a change of government.
We want any vaccine forms. Oh,
Yeah.
not all of them are there.
Some of them are 16, some of them already got it.
I got my second one today.
I'm getting yours today.
My second one.
Good. I'll just leave these right here.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're so.
How's Noah doing on the ark next door?
Here's what I think. I've thought of 2 things. One, I could put a gutter system up there, because I don't think it's going to be fixed. Or number 2, I can add some kind of thing that adds color to it, so it runs down the walls.
That sounds like the best.
It's like blue or green or red or something like that.
That's nice.
Yeah, add a little bit of
How? You did it.
Let nature do the painting.
Yeah, very artsy.
Anyway,
Can I open this back up? So you don't like this?
sure. George H.W. Bush also has problems because the Panamanians, and I know this is hard to believe, want the Americans to get out of their country. Okay? Anybody know what area of Panama is going to be problematic, where we're just kind of hanging around too much?
Panama City.
Panama Canal. Okay, we had owned the Panama Canal for almost 100 years by that point, and we had kind of promised Panama that at some point we'd clear out. We didn't. And so the Panamanian government, run by a guy at the time known as Manuel Noriega, a guy that we trained at a nice little facility called the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia. We trained him to go back and overtake his government so that it would be friendlier to the United States. Well, gosh darn it, he went back on his word and started going after Americans at that point. And so George H.W. Bush had to make the decision of what to do with him, and our solution was to go in and basically overthrow his government and capture him and bring him back here and put him in jail. And that's what we did. Causing the rest of the world to go, wait a minute, who's a democracy? They were a little judgmental of us, and rightfully so. This was not exactly a high point of the Bush presidency. The high point of the Bush presidency was the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait, a neighbor that was basically floating on oil. And Kuwait was a friend of ours, so of course when they invade Kuwait, we told him, get out, otherwise we're going to have to get involved. He said, I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. This is my neighborhood, you stay away, and of course we invaded. And when we invade Iraq for the first time in 1991, it starts the war in the Persian Gulf, okay? We basically go in with all kinds of smart technology, the early forms of smart bombs, which are a nice way of saying, I'm on the ground, I see an installation of Iraqi military jeeps, tanks, whatever else. I take out my little device, I lace the target with a laser, and then a plane flies over, a jet flies over. At that time, they were really big into the stealth bomber, and the stealth bomber flies over, drops a bomb directly on top of it, and blows them up. So we used our ridiculous technological military to squash their military awful quickly. Saddam Hussein basically said, oops, my bad, we'll get out of Kuwait, and we basically signed an agreement and moved on with life. This was not the last time we were going to get involved with Saddam Hussein, obviously. Okay? Needless to say, the Gulf War, gave us all kinds of patriotism, gave us ridiculous songs, all kinds of little ballads that we could wave a flag to, like God Bless the USA. Boy, Lee Greenwood has just made all kinds of money off that. It made us super, super happy to be American. But I digress. Bush falls into disfavor, though, because of his economic policies. At the time, he was in the process of negotiating a deal called NAFTA. That was the North American Free Trade Agreement. This was a nice way of saying we weren't going to charge tariffs between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So we could trade freely. Okay? Bush negotiates it. Clinton's the one that actually pushes it through. So in any event, it's a bipartisan thing. Both sides kind of realized, oh, hey, this might be a good thing to have a tariff-free continent. The problem is as soon as we sign it, Chevy and Ford go, wait a minute, we don't have to pay to bring cars across the border anymore? Fantastic. So they went down to Mexico, because they could pay a Mexican worker down in Mexico basically $5 a day to work in their factories, whereas up here they were paying auto workers $25, $30, $35 an hour. So they went down, started making their cars in Mexico, shipping them back and not having to pay any sort of tariff fees. And of course, for a while there, during the 1990s and early 2000s, a Chevy and a Ford was way cheaper than a Honda or a Toyota, all because of tariff fees more than anything else. Honda and Toyota have since caught up. I still remember growing up when I was about your age, people were always like, oh, we got to buy American, you got to buy a Ford, you got to buy a Chevy because that's good American-made products. Well, North American, they weren't really American-made products, quite honestly. But bottom line is, it's now changed. They've changed a lot of the tariff laws. And for those of you that have been shopping for a car recently, you've noticed that Fords and Chevys are roughly about the same as a comparable Toyota or a Honda.
Yeah, look at us.
So they're kind of falling behind, if you will.
Is everything?
Okay. And by the way, the reason is Honda and Toyota figured out that it's cheaper for them to make their cars here. So whenever somebody says, buy American, like a Honda, because they're actually made here. Honda has a big old factory, if you've ever driven up into Indiana. A huge factory up there. There's one up in Columbus as well. Okay, if you buy a Toyota, it was made in Tennessee. Okay, so if you're looking for American workforce and American, know-how, the workers are here. They're designing it over in Japan, and all the profits go back to Japan, but you're at least employing Americans. Basically, because of globalization, it's becoming harder to classify things as being made in America, or made anywhere for that matter. And look, because of a lot of these economic policies and because of the kind of the war's over type mentality, we fall into a recession, which is just a nice word that means we have a short-term economic dip. Okay, unemployment rises, the wages kind of stagnate, and economically we're not doing all that well. So because of that, Bush ends up only being a one-term president. Why? A young man by the name of William Jefferson Clinton, who is the governor of Arkansas, good old Bill Clinton, comes along and provides a different alternative. And Bill Clinton, look, you may not like the guy, maybe your parents may not like the guy, obviously he's still relevant because of Hillary. You may be a huge supporter of him. Either way, you have to admit, Bill Clinton is a very good salesperson. He could sell anything. Okay? Look, I make fun of FDR as being the guy that said the most ridiculous things and got away with it. Bill Clinton puts him to shame. Okay? During a debate, they asked George H.W. Bush, about the economy. He gives a very long, very precise answer about what the economic ills of the United States are. Then they look at Clinton and say, Governor Clinton, same question. And he goes, well, it's the economy, stupid. And they're like, what? Care to explain? He goes, well, the economy goes down, it goes up based on policies, and the policies of the last administration just haven't been very good. And everybody at home went, yeah, I get it.
So like when you like ask your wife through an essay, like that's what he did.
He's very good at that.
Yeah.
Very good at that.
That might be a good president.
And I will tell you this right now, I don't know this for sure, because I wasn't with him, but I have to believe that our most recent ex-president here probably sat at home and went, oh, that's how you do that? You can do that.
Your
And
impressions are so good.
Donald Trump was born as a politician. Look, he knew Bill Clinton before. They were actually quite good friends, believe it or not. Okay, they attended the same parties, they had the same friends. There's tons of pictures of them together. Heck, Trump used to be a Democrat. He donated to Clinton back in 1992. Okay, so they're very similar politicians. Clinton's more polished, of course, because he's a career-long politician, but they have very similar ways of getting their policies across. And look, Clinton used to get dogged all the time for talking down to the dumbest person in the room. Okay, dumbing down his speeches to make sure that everybody in the room understood what he was saying. Okay, why? He's the governor of Arkansas. No offense to Arkansas, they have one of the worst education systems in America. Okay, so if he goes off as a Harvard-educated lawyer and starts talking about fiscal policies, everybody in his audience is going to go, what? But if he says, well, it's the economy, and sometimes the economy goes up, sometimes it goes down, but I'm going to work for you because I feel your pain. They go, oh, he feels our pain. I get it. It's no different than, the American worker's been treated badly, we're going to build the wall. You and I both know that's not going to do anything, but the people in the audience are like, okay, he's going to at least do something.
He didn't.
Okay? So, no, look, Clinton's a Democrat, Trump was a registered Republican. I don't care what your political persuasion is, there are dumb people in both political parties. I don't care who you're following, there are dumb people out there. And dumb people want simple answers. Clinton and Trump have done a great job of providing simple answers to complex questions. Nobody wants to be lectured. Okay? So, sadly, our politicians have started to realize, oh, I shouldn't be a leader that teaches
Pardon the
anything.
interruption. Any student that has an appointment for the COVID vaccine, please report to the gym through the doors by the guidance office. Any student that has a consent form, you can also report to the gym through the doors by the guidance office.
Good job. All right, we got through it. All right, so Bill Clinton comes in, and again, he's just kind of a smooth-talking politician, smooth-talking Southern governor. And look, he does have some crowning achievements that he can point to. He does pass what is known as Family Medical Leave Act. This was important because during the latter stages of the 20th century, women had started to return to the workforce, but there was a problem in their return. The problem is that if they get pregnant, they're going to miss time from work. Men don't seem to have that same affliction. Okay? So, yes, I know.
Interesting conversation. That's why.
So the Family Medical Leave Act basically said that if a woman has a child or has any other, and it's not just women, men can also apply for FMLA as well. Okay? If you get sick, if you have a disease that requires extended stay in the hospital, you can apply for this. But the idea mostly was, hey, women are working very hard, they're professionals. They get, let's say you get promoted to vice president of communications or something. And then you've got to take off 4 months because you have a child, okay? And you want to be home and you want to, recover, because look, childbirth is not something that you do and the next day go right back to work, okay? It's something that you need time to recover from. So they passed this law to make sure that if you're that VP of communications, the company doesn't say, well, you chose to have a kid, so we're going to demote you or fire you and then replace you with somebody else. Because that's what was happening during the 1980s and early 90s, is that women were being told You can't have a baby. You got to choose, either have a kid or stay at the company. It's illegal for that to happen. And ladies, you need to understand that. Let's say you choose to go out and have a family while pursuing your career. The company can't look at you and say, oh, you got pregnant? Well, that was irresponsible. See ya. Okay? You can sue them for that.
Yeah.
Okay? The Family Medical Leave Act made that illegal. Sadly, we had to make that illegal. It should be common sense, but let's be honest, we've all noticed Americans aren't really very commonsensical.
Yep.
Whereas, I always hear, common sense isn't so common anymore. Okay? But the FMLA is kind of a step in that right direction, and they've been pushing for this to be extended and bolstered a little bit more than what it already has. Okay? Believe it or not, I don't care what you think about the man, but Donald Trump put his daughter, Ivanka, in charge of trying to make this even bigger. Trying to make this to where you have a longer stay. Because, like right now, I think you get about 6 weeks after childbirth. They were trying to push that out to being a solid 4 months. Okay? That you're paid to stay home. Okay? And they were looking into also, let's say you have extended time off because of cancer or because of other diseases, or you get into an accident or something like that. They were trying to actually bolster that even more. So that's currently an argument right now in the government, is trying to push for that type of medical leave. Because we're trying to be a little bit more like our European counterparts. Okay?
So, logical.
Well, the whole point is, if you're in England and you get into a car accident and the doctor says the best thing for you is to be at home and relaxing for the next 3 months, that doctor's note taken to your job, basically the job has to pay you for the 3 months that you're missing. Okay? They're saying, right now, they're arguing as to whether or not that should happen here too. And they're not just talking about career level jobs. They're not talking about, I got a career, I got a salary, they could easily just put a sub in for me. They're also talking about, hey, you're working Taco Bell and you're missing Taco Bell for the next few months because you were in a car accident coming to work, you should be covered too. Okay? Because do realize right now, if you get into an accident, you're working at Taco Bell could theoretically say, well, we got to part ways with you right now, or they're going to say, well, we're just not going to put you on the schedule until you get back and you'll get paid.
That's what happened to
Yeah.
me.
So, yeah. So they're now trying to kind of bolster this and expand it, but they are getting some pushback within the business community, of course. All right? Clinton was kind of foiled a little bit by a guy named Newt Gingrich. The same way that Reagan was constantly having to work with a guy named Tip O'Neill, who was in charge of the House. Well, Newt Gingrich is the Republican that comes to the House, and he puts forward in the early 1990s, and 1994 specifically, a document called the Contract for America. This was this kind of multi-point plan that the Republicans said, if you elect us, this is what we're going to pursue. Now, if you read through the Contract for America, it was pretty vague. It's very similar to something like the Green New Deal when they proposed that a few years back. Every once in a while, somebody will put forth kind of a vision of where we're headed. Gingrich does that, but because he promises what he promises, and he was promising things like lower taxes, less government control, less regulation, just very kind of basic stuff that you would hear from Republicans. He rode to not only election himself, but the rest of the Republicans that got in formed a solid majority. Yes, sir? Yeah. So, formed a solid majority within the Congress, and because of that, Bill Clinton had to then fight against a pretty one-sided Congress. The Republicans and he were at odds for the vast majority of his presidency. So whenever Bill Clinton kind of talks about some of his letdowns, some of the things that didn't work out all that well during his presidency, in reality, he's talking about the Republicans kind of stonewalling him. He will, of course, blame the Republicans for his impeachment. He is impeached. He's the second president ever to be impeached. What was he impeached for? Lying. Every once in a while, I have students who are like, oh, he slept around with his wife. Not illegal. It's unethical, but not illegal. Okay? But he lied about it under oath. That is illegal. That is perjury. And of course, the Republicans then impeached him in the House. He survived the Senate, just the same way Trump did recently here. And look, he survived the Senate because the Senate kind of looked at it and said, that's not really a high crime. I mean, lying under oath is not a removable offense. That was basically what they were kind of pointing towards.
Did he get like a fine or anything?
No, nothing ever happened.
That's stupid. They should at least get like
How
a.
come Hillary didn't even
Well, he could be tried in a court of law. The court could have come down on him, but they just kind of let it go.
They should have like fined them. Like give me a billion bucks.
Hillary should have left him.
Again, I'm not a marriage counselor.
Wait,
I don't know.
the girl he cheated on with was like Monica Lewinsky.
Yes,
Got it.
Monica Lewinsky.
I know, that's what I was thinking of.
Anyway,
I'm confused.
Bill Clinton's foreign policy issue was Somalia and Kosovo, for that matter. During the time that Bill Clinton was in office, Somalia kind of fell victim to warlords and all kinds of war-torn problems. It's a nation in East Africa. We got involved over there, and it ended up being kind of a bloody mess. If you ever want to watch a film about it that's super depressing, Black Hawk Down is all about that whole situation over there. It has not gotten better. Kosovo was another breakaway republic from the old Yugoslavia that fell apart into Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and all kinds of other, Slovenia. All those different republics that were formed, that fell apart because of the fall of communism as well. Bill Clinton had to kind of deal with that. He did have a foreign policy, victory in Northern Ireland. He managed to get Northern Ireland to stop killing each other over religion. He didn't personally, but he kind of got him to sign a peace agreement, which is nice. So we don't have car bombs going off every 5 minutes, which was a nice change of pace in Northern Ireland. I went there a few years back. It's actually a very nice area, as long as things aren't blown up. But there's still all kinds of graffiti everywhere about Protestants versus Catholics and Irish versus English. It's still very much a war-torn place. And then, of course, he did, if you ever go to Eastern Europe, if you go to the Czech Republic, to Prague, which is one of my favorite places, if you ever go to Prague and you start talking to somebody from Prague, they love Ronald Reagan because they feel like Reagan got rid of the communists, but they also love Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton was president when the Czech Republic and Slovakia split after Czechoslovakia was kind of formed after World War II. So they really kind of appreciate the fact. And I said, as an American, I find it odd that you're like really excited about a Republican and a Democrat at the same time. They're like, oh, you Americans are so stupid.
Exactly.
They're like, you worry too much about the presidential party and not enough about who the president is. I was like, at the time, I was like, well, Bill Clinton did kind of mess around on his wife and stuff, and they're like, so? And I was informed that in the Czech Republic, they kind of expect their president to have a couple of mistresses. That shows that he is committed towards success, apparently.
Success of what?
So I don't know.
It's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday, ain't it?
Mm.
Bye.
So needless to say, he has a couple of foreign policy victories as well. He does manage to put Ruth Bader Ginsburg onto the Supreme Court. Of course, she just recently passed away, but she becomes probably the most liberal on the Supreme Court. So Clinton always has that claim to fame when somebody talks about liberal or conservative bias on the court. He definitely put him a little bit more liberal by putting Ruth Bader Ginsburg on. I don't know if you guys have ever really researched Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She is a fascinating person. Okay? I don't care what your political leanings are. She's fascinating when it comes to civil rights legislation, litigation. She fought for equal rights of women. She fought for equal rights of gay people. She fought for equal rights of African Americans. I mean, she was just across the board a pretty impressive lawyer and an even more impressive judge. So there's some definite people you should kind of look up. I've been fascinated by her. Recently, I've been reading a book about Thurgood Marshall. I mean, these are pretty impressive people. If you're at all interested in the law, those are the people to kind of research. Clinton does have a stumble, though, at least historically, with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a policy in the military that basically said if you were gay, you don't say anything and we don't ask. The whole idea, though, is that if your superiors found out you were gay, they could throw you out of the military. Okay, so if you admitted you were gay, or if they somehow found out that you were, you could be thrown out and given a dishonorable discharge from the military. This became very controversial and was overturned during the Obama administration. And Clinton has recently said that was his biggest mistake when he was asked, which is really odd to get a guy who was impeached to say, what was your biggest mistake? No, messing around with the intern. No, it was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So, whatever, Clinton leaves after 2 terms and he gives way to George W. Bush. George W. Bush serves 2 terms himself. He almost right out of the gate has issues. and it's not from his doing at all, it's 9/11. So just a few, about 8 months after he takes the oath of office, he has to deal with the biggest terrorist attack on U.S. soil, killing about 3,000 Americans, and then having to deal with the aftermath. Of course, 9/11 was 4 different planes. 2 of them hit the World Trade Center in New York City. 1 of them hit D.C. at the Pentagon, and 1 went down in a field in Pennsylvania, as you all know. Again, it was a really dark day in American history. You guys, of course, were not born yet. I remember it very distinctly. But bottom line is, Bush had to deal with that. And it's one of the few times in my life where, like, at that moment, it didn't matter what your political party was. It didn't matter what your race, religion, and we were all American. Okay? It was one of the few times I've ever felt that. You know, kind of that common bond. We kind of forgot our animosities, and we just kind of looked towards leadership. And I knew it was going to be different when I was talking to my father, who is a lifelong Democrat and, like, can't stand Ronald Reagan, doesn't like anybody named Bush, you know, campaigns against these people. My mother is the Republican. She's okay with them. She doesn't like Bill Clinton. But when I was on the phone with him after 9/11 and asking, hey, are you okay? He was like, well, we just got to look to the president. I'm like, wow, okay, this is very different to hear my father say that, you know. He's actually following Bush. It wasn't long. It took about 3 weeks before he was like, well, wait a minute, he's kind of a moron, you know. Like it switched back pretty quickly. But, you know, it was one of the few times where I kind of saw Americans just kind of like nodding to each other and being friendly. And weirdly enough, that next summer I went to New York City to visit some family, and it's the only time I've ever been in New York City where everybody was nice to each other. You know, usually you go into a corner convenience store and, you know, you go to buy something and, you know, it's very cold. It's like, you know, yeah, have a good day. You know, like it kind of like you're wasting my time. Get out of here, whatever else. But it was the only time I ever. Hey, have a great day, okay? You be safe out there. I'm like, what the heck? This is weird. You're too nice. It was almost too creepy. You know, you expect New Yorkers to be kind of gruff, a little rude. They're back to normal, by the way. If you ever go to New York, they're back to normal. They're gonna use the F word as a comma, so just be mindful of that. Okay, they'll even use it as a greeting. Bush also has problems with his educational policy. There aren't too many teachers that are too excited about No Child Left Behind. I mean, on the surface, it's a great idea that, hey, we're going to get all students to meet a standard and all students to progress through and graduate, and we're not going to leave anybody behind. I don't think anybody's against that in the educational field. The problem was the way they were going to measure it was testing. So for those of you that love those air tests, you have this to blame. Not him directly, because it's Ohio that came up with that specific standard. That's just how we were basically fitting. You know, at first it was proficiency test, then it was the OGT. Now we're at air tests. It'll be something else in about 3 or 4 years. You know, at some point Ohio wants to just switch to straight up ACT testing. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, give the ACT. You have to get a certain point value to move on. There's a reason why next year when you're juniors we're going to make you take the ACT. Legitimately, that's why. You get a free administration of the ACT. He also had issues with Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina came through, wiped out New Orleans. Massive flooding, massive loss of life. That certainly was a problem. He was blamed on national television by Kanye West for being racist against black people, because a lot of the people that were killed in the hurricane, because of the very slow response by FEMA and a lot of our emergency services, ended up costing valuable time that could have been used to save African American lives. So he of course has to deal with that. He has to deal with the war on terrorism, because of course after 9/11 we responded in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and we had to form all kinds of coalitions and, you know, make treaties and whatever else, so he has to deal with that. And then we have, at the very tail end of his presidency, the real estate market just bottoms out. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, 2 of the biggest mortgage companies, kind of hit a huge rocky time financially, and so he's got to find out a way to kind of stabilize those companies so that mortgages don't go, you know, completely, you know, through the floor, if you will. And so they came up with TARP, which was a very, very controversial thing, because you're basically giving financial assistance to private companies, which was not met with all kinds of excitement, if you will. Which leads us to good old Barack Obama. And Barack Obama has 5 things on there. The bell's about to ring. I'll quickly just go through it. Affordable Care Act is better known as Obamacare. That's the health care initiative. Osama bin Laden, he is given credit for ordering the operation to kill Osama bin Laden. They just went through, I think, the 11th anniversary of that. I can't believe it's already been 11 years since that happened. Obergefell v. Hodges was the Supreme Court case that allowed gay marriage to become legal. And it started right here in Cincinnati. In case you don't know, Jim Obergefell is from Cincinnati. Joe Biden obviously was vice president. Now he's the president, so kind of included him on that form. And the 2009 Nobel Prize was given to Obama, and even if you ask Obama, why did you get it, he probably couldn't tell you. He's not really sure. We're still not sure why the Nobel Prize Committee said, hey, you're the guy. But he did win it, and he gave a nice speech. Other than that,